People always think the loudest person in the room is the strongest. They're wrong. Sometimes the quiet man is simply waiting until telling the truth becomes enough to destroy every lie. My daughter learned that the hard way. So did the man she married. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 69 years old, and I live alone in a modest ranch-style house on the edge of Franklin, Tennessee, where the streets stay peaceful and neighbors still wave when they drive by. It's the kind of place where summer evenings smell like freshly mowed lawns and charcoal grills. Some folks find that peaceful. Others think it's boring. I've never minded the quiet. People have mistaken my silence for weakness more times than I can count. They assumed that because I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, and didn't chase after every insult, I didn't notice what was happening. They were wrong. I noticed everything. And eventually, people pay for underestimating a quiet man. It all came to a head on Father's Day. The Tennessee heat had already settled in. The air felt heavy enough to wear, and the bright afternoon sun made every driveway shimmer. I pulled my truck into the driveway of my daughter Emily's home in a newer subdivision outside Franklin. Every house looked expensive, every yard looked professionally maintained, and every mailbox looked exactly like the next one. It was one of those neighborhoods built to impress strangers. Funny thing is, I had helped pay for more of that house than anyone there liked to admit. I grabbed a small gift from the passenger seat, a leather-bound notebook I'd bought from an independent bookstore Emily used to visit when she was younger. She always loved writing things down. Dreams, plans, random thoughts. Back then, she appreciated simple gifts. I walked to the front porch before I even had the chance to knock. The door opened. "Dad." Emily smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile I remembered. It was polite, controlled. The kind of smile people practice before company arrives. I'd been seeing that smile for almost 3 years. "Happy Father's Day," I said, hugging her. She hugged me back, though it felt brief. She smelled different too. Years ago she wore light floral perfume she'd picked herself. Now she wore the expensive brand her husband preferred. Before we could say another word, Brandon stepped into the doorway. He looked exactly as he always did. Perfect haircut. Designer watch. Pressed linen shirt with the sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms. Everything about him looked carefully arranged, including the confident smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Daniel," he said while extending his hand. His handshake was firm. Always just a little firmer than necessary. Almost like every greeting was another competition. "Brandon." I shook his hand without reacting. Lunch had already been set up in their formal dining room. The room probably saw more holidays than ordinary dinners. Tall windows. Fancy lighting. Decor that looked expensive enough to make guests nervous about touching anything. Emily had cooked several of my favorite dishes. I noticed that. I noticed details most people overlook. For a while, the conversation stayed pleasant. Weather. Neighbors. Vacation plans. Work. Then Brandon slowly guided the discussion where he wanted it. He had a habit of doing that. He never jumped directly into talking about himself. He eased into it, giving everyone just enough time to admire him before he started admiring himself. Finally, he cleared his throat. "So, I don't know how much Emily has told you." "Probably not much," I answered. He smiled proudly. "My company is about to land the biggest contract we've ever pursued." Emily immediately looked at him with admiration. Years ago she'd looked at me like that whenever I'd fixed something around the house or shown up at one of her school events. Now that same look belonged to him. "It's a commercial redevelopment project," Brandon continued. "If everything goes through, it'll completely change the company." "Sounds important," I replied. "It is." He leaned back comfortably. "We're talking about something that could put our business on the map across the entire state." Emily couldn't hide her excitement. "I've never seen him work this hard," she said proudly. I nodded once. "I'm sure." Then I asked the question that changed the entire afternoon. How did your company get in front of that board? For less than a second, something shifted across Brandon's face. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. His smile tightened. His eyes flickered. Then he recovered. You know how business works, he said casually. You spend enough years building relationships, and eventually the right doors open. Relationships. Interesting choice of words. I slowly picked up my fork and took another bite. Because I already knew exactly which door had opened. And I knew whose name had unlocked it. What neither Brandon nor Emily realized was that 3 weeks earlier, someone from my past had accidentally revealed a secret they thought I'd never discover. And from that moment on, I stopped preparing to forgive. I started preparing to tell the truth. 3 weeks before that Father's Day lunch, my phone rang just after breakfast. The caller was Harold Simmons, a man I'd worked beside for more than 25 years in commercial property consulting before retiring. Harold wasn't the type to waste anyone's time. If he called, there was usually a reason. Daniel, he said cheerfully, I guess congratulations are in order. I frowned. For what? He laughed. Don't play modest with me. I saw your name on the proposal that crossed my desk this morning. Looks like retirement didn't last very long. For a second, I honestly thought he had the wrong person. What proposal? There was a pause. The one from Brandon Carter Development Group. You're listed as one of their senior strategic advisors and professional references. I didn't answer. Harold kept talking, assuming I already knew. They're chasing that redevelopment contract outside Franklin. That's a serious opportunity. I figured Brandon finally convinced you to come aboard. I see, was all I managed to say. We spoke another minute before hanging up. Then I just sat there. The coffee in front of me slowly went cold while I stared through the kitchen window into my backyard. I wasn't thinking. Not really. I was trying to understand what I'd just heard. Someone had attached my name to a multi-million-dollar proposal. Without ever speaking to me. Without asking. Without permission. Over 35 years I'd built a reputation that people trusted. Clients trusted me. Developers trusted me. County officials trusted me. When I gave my word, people believed it. That reputation hadn't appeared overnight. It had been earned one honest conversation at a time. One difficult decision after another. One promise kept after the next. I'd turned down deals that would have made me wealthy simply because they weren't right. I'd walked away from partnerships when someone wanted shortcuts. There were easier ways to make money. I just never wanted them. Apparently Brandon wanted the benefits of my name, without doing the work required to earn one like it himself. I never called him. I never confronted Emily. People assume immediate confrontation solves problems. Sometimes it only gives dishonest people time to prepare another lie. Instead, I quietly started gathering facts. I called Harold back the next morning. Can you send me the page that mentions me? Of course, he answered without hesitation. 20 minutes later the document arrived in my inbox. I printed it. Then I read every single page. There it was. Page 4. Exactly as Harold had described. Daniel Mercer, Senior Strategic Advisor. Professional reference. I read those lines 3 or 4 times. They never changed. Neither did the truth. I had never seen the proposal before that morning. Nobody from Brandon's company had contacted me. Nobody had requested permission. Nobody had even hinted my name would appear anywhere near that project. The more I read, the calmer I became. That might sound strange. Most people become angry first. I've learned something after nearly 70 years. Real anger is loud. Real certainty is quiet. By Thursday afternoon I'd already made my decision. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to threaten anyone. I certainly wasn't going to start a family fight over the phone. I would simply wait. Father's Day seemed like the appropriate moment. If Brandon was comfortable using my name while sitting at my daughter's dinner table every holiday, then he could explain himself there too. So I waited. Patiently. By the time Father's Day arrived, I already knew exactly what I intended to say. Back in their dining room, Brandon continued talking about future profits while Emily listened with admiration. He had no idea I'd already seen every page of that proposal. When everyone finished eating, I calmly reached beside my chair. Inside my jacket was a neatly folded folder. I placed it on the table. "Brandon," I said evenly, "we need to discuss something." His eyes immediately dropped toward the papers. For the first time all afternoon, his confidence cracked. Just a little. Emily looked back and forth between us. "Dad, what's that?" I unfolded the documents carefully. No dramatic movements. No raised voice. No accusations. I simply turned the pages until they faced Brandon. "This is the proposal your company submitted for the redevelopment contract." Neither of them spoke. I tapped one paragraph with my finger. "My name is listed right here." Emily leaned closer. Brandon didn't. He already knew exactly what was written there. "I never agreed to this," I continued calmly. "I never gave anyone permission to represent me as your advisor." Emily looked confused. "What are you talking about?" "I found out because Harold Simmons called to congratulate me on joining Brandon's company." Her eyes widened. "You, what?" "I wasn't joining anything." Silence settled across the room. Heavy silence. The kind that changes everything. Brandon slowly put down his knife. "Daniel, it's honestly more complicated than it looks." I looked directly at him. "No." I spoke quietly. "It's actually very simple." He swallowed. I continued. "I want every document containing my name corrected immediately. Every filing. Every proposal. Every copy that's been submitted. I expect it removed no later than Monday." Brandon leaned back in his chair and slowly exhaled. I recognized that expression. He wasn't thinking about the truth. He was calculating. Trying to decide which move gave him the best chance to survive. A second later, he made his choice. And instead of speaking to me, he turned toward my daughter. Brandon didn't even try to answer me. Instead, he looked at Emily with the expression of a man who suddenly realized the easiest way out wasn't defending himself, it was making someone else fight for him. His shoulders slumped just enough to look wounded. "Emily," he said quietly, "your dad is trying to destroy everything we've spent the last 2 years building." He let the sentence hang in the air. He wanted it to settle before anyone else spoke. I had watched enough negotiations throughout my career to recognize the tactic immediately. Don't answer the accusation. Change the emotion. Change the audience. Emily turned toward me. "Dad, what is he talking about?" "I'm asking him to stop using my name without permission." Brandon sighed dramatically. "It isn't like that." "It is exactly like that." Emily looked between us, clearly trying to understand. Brandon spoke again before she had the chance. "This contract is our future." His voice sounded hurt now. "We've invested everything into it." He looked at her instead of me. "I honestly don't understand why your father would choose Father's Day to do something like this." That sentence landed exactly where he'd aimed it. Emily's expression changed. Confusion slowly became frustration. Then frustration became anger. "He's worked on this project for 2 years, she said, looking at me. "I know. You know how many nights he stayed at the office?" "I do. You know how much pressure he's been under?" "I imagine quite a bit." Her voice rose. "And now you're threatening to ruin everything?" I kept my eyes on her. I'm asking him to remove my name from documents I never approved. It's just a reference. No. I shook my head. It isn't. If I never agreed to it, it isn't a reference. It's a false representation. Brandon finally spoke again. I assumed you wouldn't mind. I looked at him. You assumed wrong. I only wanted people to know we had experienced professionals supporting the company. You didn't have experienced professionals supporting your company. You borrowed one. Emily pushed her chair back. The sound echoed through the dining room. Dad. Her voice was louder now. So what? So he should have called first? That's all this is? No. I answered calmly. It's about honesty. He trusted your reputation. I almost smiled. Exactly. She frowned. I don't understand. My reputation belongs to me. It isn't something another man gets to use because it's convenient. Brandon rubbed both hands together. He was nervous now. I could see it. The confidence he'd walked into lunch with was disappearing. But instead of admitting he'd crossed the line, he stayed silent. He knew Emily was already arguing on his behalf. Why interrupt someone doing your work for you? Then Emily looked directly at me. If you report this. She hesitated. The contract could disappear. Possibly. You'd actually let that happen? I won't be the one causing it. Her eyebrows tightened. You know what I mean. I do. And my answer is still no. She stared at me for several long seconds. Then she said something I'll never forget. If you loved this family. She swallowed. You'd support us. I looked at her carefully. I do love this family. Then prove it. I am. No, you're protecting your pride. I'm protecting my name. They're the same thing. No. I answered quietly. They aren't. She folded her arms. So what happens if Brandon refuses? Then I'll speak with the people reviewing the proposal. The room became completely silent. Brandon finally looked up. His face had gone pale. Emily stared at me as though I were someone she'd never met. You would actually do that? Yes. She shook her head slowly. I can't believe this. I didn't respond. Sometimes silence carries more weight than another explanation. She took a deep breath. Then the words came. If that's really what you're going to do. Another pause. Then you don't need to come back here. I looked at her. She wasn't speaking in anger anymore. She believed every word. This is our home now. She gestured around the dining room. Our family. If you can't support us, then maybe you shouldn't be part of it. For just a moment, I wasn't looking at a 29-year-old woman. I was remembering a little girl riding on my shoulders at county fairs, learning to ride a bicycle, running into my arms after school. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped seeing me as her father. I'd become someone expected to fix problems without asking questions. Someone whose loyalty could always be assumed. Brandon remained completely silent. His expression gave him away. It was subtle, barely noticeable. The corner of his mouth lifted. Just enough. The smile of a man convinced he'd won. He'd probably watched me give in dozens of times over the years. He expected this to become one more. Instead, I slowly stood up. I folded the proposal, placed it back inside the folder, picked up my jacket. Then I looked directly at my daughter. My voice never changed, never became louder, never became colder. I simply said 5 words. Let's see who needs who. Neither of them answered. I turned toward the front door. Behind me, no one tried to stop me. No one apologized. No one admitted the truth. I walked outside, climbed into my truck, and drove home without looking back once. They probably believed I'd finally accepted defeat. They thought I was going home to sulk, to calm down, maybe even to reconsider. They couldn't have been more wrong. Because by the time I pulled into my driveway, I already knew exactly who I was going to call Monday morning. And after that single phone call, nothing in Brandon's carefully built world would ever be the same again. I got home a little before 7 that evening. I remember the time because the clock above my stove read 6:43 p.m. when I walked through the kitchen door. Funny how the mind remembers little things when life changes direction. I hung my keys on the hook by the door, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the kitchen table without turning on a single light. The house was completely silent. Normally that kind of silence feels peaceful. That evening it felt different. Not empty. Final. For a long time I simply sat there. I replayed everything Emily had said. Not because I was looking for a better response. Because I was finally hearing the truth. 4 years after my divorce, I had convinced myself that keeping the peace was the same as protecting my daughter. Whenever Emily became upset, I apologized. Whenever she gave me an ultimatum, I backed down. Whenever she made me choose between my dignity and our relationship, I chose her. Every single time. At first I thought that was what good fathers did. Eventually it became a habit. Then it became expectation. Somewhere over the years, Emily stopped believing my love was a gift. She started believing it was guaranteed. And Brandon, he noticed. People like him always notice whose boundaries can be pushed. That realization hurt more than anything she had said during dinner. Not because she'd changed. Because I'd helped teach her that I would always give in. Around 9 that night, I went to bed. To my own surprise, I slept better than I had in years. No tossing. No staring at the ceiling. No imaginary arguments. Just sleep. Real sleep. When I woke up before sunrise Monday morning, something inside me felt lighter. Not happier. Lighter. Like I'd finally put down a heavy box I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it wasn't supposed to belong to me. I brewed coffee, stepped onto my back porch, and watched the morning mist drift across the yard. Birds didn't care about family arguments. The sun still came up. Life kept moving. So would I. At exactly 8:30, I got dressed the way I used to when I still worked full-time. Pressed blue shirt. Dark slacks. Polished shoes. No one was coming to see me. But I believed some conversations deserved respect. Even if they happened over the phone. There was only one person I needed to speak with. His name was Charles Whitaker. He chaired the County Redevelopment Commission. Charles and I had known each other for over 30 years. We'd served on planning committees together. Attended zoning meetings together. Shared countless lunches after difficult negotiations. More importantly, he knew exactly what kind of man I was. At 8:47, I dialed his direct number. He answered almost immediately. Daniel. His voice sounded genuinely happy. Don't tell me retirement finally got boring. I smiled. Not quite. What can I do for you? I need about 10 minutes. There was a short pause. Then his tone changed. Serious. You have them. I started at the beginning. I told him Brandon's company had submitted a proposal listing me as a professional advisor. I explained I'd never agreed to participate. Never reviewed the documents. Never gave permission for my name to appear anywhere. I carefully described how I'd discovered it through Harold. I explained that Brandon had never even mentioned using my reputation. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't insult anyone. I simply laid out the facts. When I finished, Charles remained silent for several seconds. Finally he spoke. Daniel. His voice had become much quieter. Are you willing to put all of this in writing? I already have. I can bring a signed statement before lunch. Another pause. I'm sorry this happened. So am I. I've spent 35 years protecting my reputation. I'd like to keep it. You have every right. Those were his exact words. Every right. We ended the call a minute later. That was it. 10 minutes. No shouting. No threats. Just the truth. I printed the statement I'd prepared the night before, signed every page, and drove straight to the commission offices. The receptionist accepted the envelope. When she read my name, her expression changed slightly. Recognition. Respect. Maybe concern. I'm sure Mr. Whitaker will want this immediately, she said. I appreciate it. I thanked her and left. Driving home should have felt satisfying. Instead, I felt sad. Not because I'd done anything wrong. Because I knew what would happen next. Truth has consequences. Sometimes those consequences reach people you still love. Back home I made another cup of coffee and sat on my porch. I kept thinking about Emily as a little girl. How she'd fall asleep in the back seat after long drives. How I'd carry her inside without waking her. How she'd squeeze my neck even while she slept. Those memories don't disappear just because your child becomes an adult. They're still there. Always. Monday evening I allowed myself to grieve. Not the contract. Not Brandon. The relationship I thought my daughter and I still had. Tuesday morning I got up exactly as I always did. Made breakfast. Read the newspaper. Watered the flowers. Life moved forward. Around 2 in the afternoon my phone rang. Harold. You sitting down? I am now. The Redevelopment Commission suspended Brandon's proposal this morning. I stayed quiet. Harold continued. They opened an ethics review after your statement came in. I closed my eyes. Not out of relief. Out of certainty. It had begun. They're checking every document submitted with the application. Harold lowered his voice. And Daniel. Yeah. The story is already spreading. I knew exactly what that meant. In commercial development, news doesn't stay private for long. Especially when someone's integrity comes into question. Reputations travel faster than paperwork. By Tuesday evening, Harold called again. 2 investors backed away. Already. They aren't saying why. They don't have to. He laughed quietly. No. They definitely don't. For the first time since Father's Day, I realized Brandon wasn't about to lose just one project. He was about to discover what happens when the reputation you borrowed suddenly disappears. And judging by how quickly the phones had stopped ringing for him, the fall had already begun. Wednesday morning started like every other morning. At least for me. I was awake before 6, made coffee, cooked a couple of eggs, and stepped outside with the newspaper. The air was warm already, and the sun had barely climbed over the trees. Nothing looked unusual. But somewhere across town, everything was coming apart inside Brandon's house. I didn't know the details yet. Those came later. What I did know was that my phone refused to stay quiet. The first call arrived at 7:38 a.m. Brandon. I looked at his name on the screen. Then I let it ring until voicemail picked up. A few minutes later, he called again. Then again. By 9 o'clock he'd already tried 4 times. Finally a text appeared. Daniel, we need to talk. This has gotten completely out of control. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Please call me. I read it once. Then I locked my phone without replying. Misunderstanding. That was an interesting word. There hadn't been any misunderstanding. He knew exactly what he'd done. The only thing he hadn't expected was that I'd finally stop accepting it. Around 10 o'clock another call came through. This time it was Emily. I stared at her name for a long moment. A father never stops recognizing his child's name, no matter how old she becomes. My thumb hovered over the answer button. Then I set the phone back on the table. She needed to reach the truth herself. Not because I wanted revenge. Because lessons borrowed from someone else rarely last. People believe what they discover on their own. The phone stopped ringing. 5 minutes later it started again. Emily. Again. I didn't answer. By lunchtime the calls stopped completely. That silence told me more than any voicemail ever could. Something had changed. Later that week, Emily told me exactly what happened inside that house after I left Father's Day dinner. Brandon had spent Monday pretending everything would work out. He kept saying lawyers would straighten things out. He insisted the review board was overreacting. He even claimed my statement wouldn't matter. But by Tuesday evening, his confidence had disappeared. The suspension became official. Investors stopped returning his calls. 2 companies quietly postponed meetings they'd already scheduled. One bank requested additional documentation before discussing financing. Every hour another door closed. And every closed door reminded him of one thing. My name wasn't opening them anymore. Emily told me she had never seen him panic before. He walked through the house carrying 2 phones, making call after call, leaving voicemail after voicemail, sending emails, checking his inbox every few minutes, sleeping almost not at all. Then Wednesday morning, reality finally caught him. The Redevelopment Commission sent formal notice that the proposal had entered a full ethics investigation. The project wasn't simply delayed anymore. Everything connected to it was now under review. Brandon read the letter twice. Then he threw it across the kitchen. Emily said she'd never seen him lose control like that. The charming businessman disappeared. The confident husband disappeared. Even the polished image he'd spent years building disappeared. What remained? Was someone angry? Someone frightened? Someone looking for another person to blame? Unfortunately, the closest person happened to be my daughter. According to Emily, he started shouting almost immediately. First he blamed me. Then he blamed the review board. Then Harold. Then his own employees. Finally, he blamed her. He wouldn't have done this if you'd handled your father. Those were his words. Emily remembered every one of them. You were supposed to keep him on our side. She stared at him in disbelief. What are you talking about? You should have convinced him. I tried. You didn't try hard enough. Emily told me she couldn't believe what she was hearing. For years she'd defended Brandon, excused him, explained away every selfish decision, every broken promise, every arrogant comment. Now, he wasn't even pretending. He spoke as if she were simply another business asset that had failed to perform. Then came the sentence she said she'd never forget. The only reason your father mattered was because people respected his name. Silence. Brandon didn't even realize what he'd admitted. He kept talking. If Daniel had just kept quiet, none of this would have happened. Emily looked at him. So, you only needed my father because of his reputation? He answered without thinking. Of course. Then he froze. Too late. The truth had already left his mouth. Emily later told me that was the exact moment something inside her broke. Not because she'd learned something new. Because she'd finally admitted something she'd been refusing to see for years. Brandon hadn't married into a family. He'd married into opportunities. She left the room without saying another word. He followed her through the house, apologizing 1 minute and blaming everyone else the next. By afternoon he had gone from angry to desperate. Meanwhile, I knew none of this. I spent Wednesday pulling weeds from the flower bed behind my house. Sometimes the timing of life is strange. While one family falls apart, someone else is quietly watering tomatoes. Around 3 o'clock I heard knocking at my front door. 3 soft knocks. Not hurried. Not angry. Almost hesitant. Before I even reached the hallway, I already knew who it was. I looked through the narrow window beside the door. Emily stood on the porch. She wasn't dressed for appearances anymore. No expensive makeup. No carefully styled hair. No polished smile. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She looked exhausted. For just a second, I didn't see a grown woman. I saw the little girl who used to stand outside my apartment after the divorce, clutching her stuffed rabbit while trying not to cry. I opened the door. She looked at me for several seconds before speaking. "Dad." Her voice almost disappeared. "Can we talk?" I opened the door without saying a word and stepped aside. Emily walked in slowly, as if she wasn't sure she deserved to be there. She looked around my house for a moment. Everything was exactly as she'd always remembered. The same family pictures. The same old clock in the hallway. The same kitchen table where we'd eaten pancakes on Saturday mornings when she was little. Only now she looked at those things differently. "Sit down," I said. She nodded. I put a kettle on the stove. Whenever something upset her as a kid, she'd ask for tea instead of coffee. Some habits never disappear. We sat across from each other for almost a full minute without speaking. Finally she broke the silence. I was wrong. 3 simple words. No excuses. No explanations. Just the truth. I waited. She took a deep breath. "After you left, everything fell apart." I didn't interrupt. He wasn't trying to protect our future. She looked down at her hands. He was trying to protect himself. Another pause. He screamed at me. Tears filled her eyes again. He blamed you. He blamed the review board. He blamed everyone except himself. She shook her head. And then he admitted something. I already knew. Still, I let her say it. He said the only reason he ever wanted your name connected to his company was because people trusted you. She laughed once. A broken laugh. He actually said it out loud. Her eyes met mine. I finally understood. You weren't trying to hurt us. You were protecting everything you'd spent your life building. I nodded slowly. Yes. She covered her face with both hands. I treated you like the bad guy. For years. I kept asking you to choose me over the truth. Her voice cracked. And every single time. You did. I leaned forward. Emily. She looked up. I made mistakes too. She frowned. I confused love with surrender. I believed being a good father meant never letting you be disappointed. I smiled sadly. But every time I gave up my own boundaries, I taught you they didn't matter. She listened without saying anything. And Brandon noticed. That sentence hit her harder than anything else I'd said. She slowly nodded. He did. He watched me apologize. He watched me back down. He learned I'd always move if someone pushed hard enough. And then he expected the same thing. Neither of us spoke for several moments. The tea between us had already cooled. Finally, Emily whispered, "What do I do now?" I smiled gently. "That's your decision. I'll help you when you truly need me. But I can't live your life for you." She nodded. I understand. For the first time in years, I believed she actually did. Just then my phone buzzed on the counter. Brandon. Again. Emily looked at the screen. He's been calling all day. I know. Are you going to answer? I watched the phone vibrate until it stopped. No. She almost smiled. I think that's the first time I've ever seen you refuse to rescue someone. I smiled back. Sometimes the most helpful thing you can do is let people face the consequences they created. She stayed another hour. We talked about old memories. About her childhood. About her mother. About mistakes we'd both made. Not once did we argue. When she stood to leave, she wrapped her arms around me. Not the quick, polite hug she'd given me on Father's Day. A real one. The kind that lasts a little longer than expected. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know. I don't deserve another chance." I gently squeezed her shoulder. "Maybe not. But you're still my daughter." She cried again. This time, the tears felt different. Not hopeless. Healing. After she drove away, I sat alone on the back porch watching the sun disappear behind the trees. About 20 minutes later my phone buzzed one last time. Another voicemail from Brandon. I listened to it only once. He apologized. Then he justified. Then he blamed. Then he asked me to call Charles Whitaker and clear everything up. He insisted it had all been a misunderstanding. It wasn't. When the message ended, I deleted it. Some conversations don't deserve a second hearing. Over the following weeks, Brandon's company continued losing business. The redevelopment contract was officially awarded elsewhere after the investigation concluded. Several partners quietly walked away. His reputation, built on borrowed credibility, collapsed much faster than mine had ever been built. Emily eventually met with an attorney. She never asked me to solve her problems. Only for advice when she genuinely needed it. That told me she'd begun growing in ways I couldn't have forced before. People often ask whether I forgave Brandon. The answer is simple. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. I stopped carrying anger. But I never handed him another opportunity to misuse my name. As for Emily, our relationship slowly became healthier than it had been in years. Not because everything was forgotten. Because, for the first time, everything was honest. Looking back now, I don't think the most important moment happened when the investigation began. Or when Brandon lost the contract. Or even when Emily came to my front door in tears. The most important moment happened much earlier. It happened the instant I decided that loving my daughter didn't require sacrificing my integrity. That one decision changed every conversation that followed. Some people spend their whole lives believing quiet men are easy to break. What they never understand is that quiet men usually aren't holding anger. They're holding patience. And patience becomes incredibly powerful the moment it's no longer protecting someone else's lies. If you were in my place, would you have exposed the truth immediately, or would you have handled it differently? Let me know your answer in the comments.